want to start?
Yes, I'm here. Hello. Well, I'd like to welcome you. I think we start the live session now. We have 21 participants. So I think I hope you liked this video. We have posted an answer to a couple of questions within the video, but as it was pre-recorded, hopefully some of you might have additional questions to our approach. I think it's unfortunately not possible to turn on the microphone. So the approach would be that please just post your questions into the chat and we try to answer them here. So if in the meantime, I think we would just continue with this setting that we have, and I think Andreas has some more questions on what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, until we get some questions from the participants, we might start with the additional questions.
Yes, sure. So to all of you, please post your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer them as accurate as possible and show you in the tool. Maybe to start with, just a question you mentioned, or we mentioned in the last presentation that there are several phases, and there are the quality gates. And can you show in the system how let's say that the DOR, the definition of ready, is done between the requirements phase, the quick requirements analysis, and the implementation phase? That would be interesting, I think, for everybody, how this is done in the tool.
Okay, I can show you the tool and the workflow. So I think I have to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, Matthias.
Yes.
All right. So, okay, in the tool it would look like the following. Well, we have chosen Jira and Confluence to implement this workflow that I just showed, or that we just showed. So to see how it would look like in the system, well, you remember we have been talking about activities, the BA activities and the development or implementation activities. So what you can see here is the backlog of the system and the BA view, so the view of the BA activity. Okay, so we do have our product backlog below. So as a PO, for example, product manager, I would see a lot of stories here that are being imported into the system into a kind of raw form, right? So I, as a PO, would now go through these stories and prioritize the backlog. So, for example, I would see, okay, this demo story 7 is quite important for the product at the moment. So I would put it, just drag and drop it here using this Jira into the status to do. I mean, I showed you the status. So that means this 37 will then appear in a different view. That's the Kanban board for the BAs, and they would see this new story in a raw format in their to-do list. Right? Means for them, okay, there's a new task, a new story, and I'm able to pick up that story and process it. Right. So I'm not going to fill in all the data of this user story, but just to show you the workflow. So if I would now be a BA who has some capacity, I would see the story and I would say, okay, that's something for me. I will put it into in progress and start working on it. Right? Very normally open story and fill out all that I need. That means that the description, all the details that would be required for the story, the risk assessment. It's a bit slow today, the system, I have to admit, but yeah. And So I would edit this story and fill all the information according to our predefined definition of ready. Acceptance criteria added, the test cases linked, the summary of the story written in a proper format, and so on. Priorities set correct. If there are linked issues, so requirements that are linked to that stories, I could edit here. I would provide or check the risk category. So in our system, we have the GAMP category and the business criticality. You could, of course, add much more properties here. That's completely free to be configured. So I would add this information here, and then I would put it into in review, so that my colleague can review it. I would put it into done if I'm done as a BA. So, and if I now go to development workflow, that's the second view that we have. I see still the backlog here. That's all the stories which are in the backlog for the developers. So the 73 is not yet here. That's because we are in done. So the next step would be proving this story in from QA after they had checked it, and you would put it into approve. And performing these actions, I could go back to the development workflow. Of course, I have to do a refresh just on the screen and wait until Jira shows me some information. But what you should see is then that Jira will provide you these stories in the to-do backlog of the development. Just a matter of hours. Normally the system is should be faster. That's the demo effect. Great. Okay, here it is. Okay, and now I have, you see, this wasn't there before. Now it appears in the backlog of the developers. And again, as a PO or product manager, I do have the possibility to reprioritize the story. And if it's important, I would just put it in the to-do list of the developers, which results in the fact that I see the story here. So the same thing happens again. The developers are looking on their Kanban board and see there's a new task to do, and would put this, or would take these stories for this story for development. This is of course typically happening then in the sprint planning if you're using Scrum as a implementation methodology.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Sure. Yes. Thank you very much.
Matthias, there is one question in the chat. Maybe we can go on this one.
Yeah.
The question is if we, at each release, which kind of documents we are creating. For example, do we do a UAT report, a traceability matrix, or if we are relying on the tool? Maybe I can give some information and then you can complete if it's not enough. So thank you for your question. Basically, the minimal documentation that or the minimal reporting we provide is the release note to make sure that it's always clear which requirements are addressed in which release. Due to the reporting, maybe Matthias, you will show afterwards the reports, the traceability matrix, for example. We can always export these reports in a PDF, for example. So it's more a matter of implementation, what in your setup or validation documentation you need to have as a document, as an additional document, and if you want to even approve it in another system. But we are relying on the tool right now for providing this information. Do you want to add something, maybe Matthias or Andy?
Well, I think you said the most important things, yeah. So documentation, and I mean the thing is, it's important to separate between increments and really releases. So we do have increments that stay, for example, on the testing or development instance, which is the result of, for example, each sprint, which is a typical increment. And then, as I said, or as we said, we decide which pre-releases we do deploy on the validation environment for formal testing. And depending on the scope of the release, there's only one productive release at the end. And depending on what kind of validation plan or SAP I do have, the resulting documents finally at latest point in time will have to be created at this point in time. But we recommend to produce these documents during the implementation, it's iterative implementation phase already.
Okay, thank you for the question that was posted in the chat. Please go on asking your questions. Maybe in the meantime, I have another question for you, Matthias. You had in one of the slides, you had this bar for the testing.
Yeah.
And I mean, coming for the traditional methodologies, I see I have OQ and PQ in mind there. Yeah. So informal and formal testing, maybe. What about the IQ? Where is the IQ in your workflow? Is it maybe it's connected to the last question also? Mm-hmm. For which parts is IQ done?
IQ is also managed within the test plugin that we use, and is normally performed by each pre-release that we deploy on validation. Yeah? So before we deploy on validation, you must make sure that IQ tests and IQ documentation is up to date. This is typically at the beginning of such a project. You create your first initial IQ, and well, sometimes during development phase you have to create some updates on that document, right? But typically the biggest part of it or the core will be done at the beginning of the project, and then you do some updates according to the features and that you develop during the implementation phase. Maybe you don't have to update the IQ at all. It depends. Once it's been approved. But you know, this is we have created some folders for IQ, OQ, PQ, and of course here would be then also the tests for the IQ. Well, we haven't created some test cases so far, as we are quite at the beginning, but here would be the test cases of the IQ, similar to the other test cases that we have created. Yeah. In this tool, and all these test cases will be managed in the same system, in one system, which is for me quite crucial. Typical test scripts can be created, right? Execution of the tests can be tracked. Traceability. Oh, maybe because you ask about the traceability, I can show you the report that we currently where we are. So that's a kind of a screenshot that that's based on the screenshot that I showed you.
It's maybe because of the live session.
Sorry.
It's much slower.
That is so slow today.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's with.
That's maybe because of the live session. Yeah, but in the meantime, maybe while this thing is loading, I could show you a kind of a report that we have added. So we're using Confluence and Jira together as a tool set, because it's from the same company. It's from Atlassian. It's very well integrated with each other. So Confluence is a wiki tool, and the Jira is a project management and document and tracking tool. So what I briefly created is one of these system overview reports within Confluence. So that's just a live report from Jira. And what you can see here is, oops, it's a bit too. I just added now all the user stories in this report that belong to release 1, which is the MVP, the first release. So you really see all the release scope, all the features of the release scope. You can add the business criticality, the GAMP category, properties that we've added. You can see the linked issues of it. So for example, the functional specifications, design specifications, you can see to which epic. So an epic is a kind of category. to summarize the features. And this is quite a nice feature. If you see all the status of these user stories, then for you as a QA, or also for the product owner or for some stakeholders, they really have the possibility to see at any point in time what is the status of my project. How many stories are still in view? That means they have to be developed. Is there some stories or features that are already in a testing phase? Are there features that are here validated already? So that means they have gone through the whole process of the user story. So it gives you a quite impression of the status of your release. And of course, this is live data. So this is just a report. It's a link of a web application. So at any point in time, everybody can see the complete status of our work. I mean, that's really full transparency of what we do.
Matthias, another way of monitoring the project is also the traceability. Can you please show us the traceability?
Yeah, that was the thing I wanted to show you. Okay, now I see. I have to go to reports. Okay. So for example, this is what we have set up at the moment, as I said. Kind of traceability report here. So I created I included all the types that we have currently added so far in our system, which is user story, functional specification, configuration specification, and improvement. And if you click on generate, this is now the live report giving you all the full pictures of where we are. So you see the traceability of, for example, this item. You see by which test case it's being covered. You see it's executed. When it's executed, you see the status of the execution, right? And so on. As I said, you see some of these stories which are not yet covered. So we have to check for at the moment if the story does not need some kind of testing because of the risk assessment, or if it's just still needs to be done. So and as I said, the next thing that we do is, or that we try to do, is to include here also the information of the risk analysis, so that we can see, okay, this story does not need a test coverage or a testing, or it still has to be done because it's work in progress.
So maybe just to add, so basically the really important is to have everything in one place, so that we don't transfer any data from one system to another one. So that everything is consistent at one place, and with the quality gates to ensure that the quality is directly created when you define the user story, the test case, and so on.
Yep.
And by not transferring anything to other documents, you don't lose this quality.
Yeah. And in parallel, we are also now evaluating some other plugin that will give us more technical possibilities. For example, including also this traceability into Confluence, and creating more sophisticated, more enhanced reports and this kind of stuff. But that's what we use at the moment.
We have another question in the chat. Thanks for that. The question is how dependencies are managed between requirements. And there was an addition, a new requirement could impact directly or indirectly other requirements. How are dependencies managed in the system?
Okay, there is a field within each story or user specification object that allows you to enter a link to any other object in the system. So from a technical perspective, all these records are more or less just flat records of different types. So we have type user story, we have type functional specification, we have type configuration specification. And I do have the possibility to link bidirectional each of these items to each other. So, of course, as I said, in the BA workflow, there will be a check that functional specification items will be linked to a user story, to a requirement. If I see I do have a dependency of two different stories or requirements, I can also directly add a dependency of one user story to another one. And unfortunately, the system is too slow. But there is a dependency of the link. So you can give several types of the linking of these different objects. For example, we have decided to create a link that's called implements if we linking a user story to a functional specification. So the functional specification implements the user story. That could very well be, okay, now we're here. That could very well be also a link that says blocks or depends on. Then we could just link to different user stories with each other.
And then you see it in the traceability matrix, how everything is.
And then you, yeah. Of course, one nice thing would be to have a dependency map, which is possible in Jira. We just haven't implemented it for the MVP at the moment. But a dependency map would graphically show you then the dependencies of all these objects. Now you can see it. Okay. So linked issue implements, for example, I do have many link types. So implements relates to is caused by blocks. If I do have a requirement that blocks that blocks another requirement, then I could add this dependency here. And of course, I can then just click on that drop down, and that drop down gives me all the issues that I have, right? So if I select one of these issues or types, I click on update. So I have created a dependency of these two stories with each other. And you see it here in this section linked issues.
Maybe a level above is the linkage from the epic to the user requirements to group in requirements topics.
Yeah, but this is implicit in the tool. So
exactly.
This is built-in functionality that. Yeah.
There's still some minutes left, so please go ahead and post your questions. Maybe I have a question that is not directly for the tool, but you mentioned that the process that you showed in the last session is actually a cyclic method. Can you please elaborate a little bit on that? That we go back actually into the planning phase, if needed.
So not sure if I got you correctly. So you mean how to go back into for each story or what?
No, you mentioned that from the reporting phase there was a arrow back to the planning phase. In your figure that you showed in the slides.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that arrow a little bit? How the cyclic approach is meant?
I can maybe give some information, and then Matthias, you can complete. So basically, if you start a project and you have never worked in such a way, this planning phase may be a little bit longer, let's say, because you need to implement the tool, you need to describe the processes, you will create your validation plan, you will do the supplier, and then from iteration to from release to release, this planning phase may become shorter because you may just have to, let's say, fine-tune your processes, do some kind of looping back of the experience, maybe update your validation planning because you saw some missing elements, But this planning phase will be shorter, but still it's important to keep this loop going on for each release, to think about, okay, do I need to improve my tools? Do I need to improve my validation plan? Do I need to update some SOP to do some training? Did I learn something from the previous release? And that is this planning phase. Therefore, the arrow going back to the planning phase, still if we think in an agile way with the iteration phases, let's say, or in the increment. Was it your question, Andreas, related to the?
Thank you.
And well, ideally, this new, I mean, for the first release, the planning phase will be, of course, quite huge, because you do have initially to do all the supplier assessments. You have to create the validation plan, and so on, and the risk and the system risk assessment and so on. In the next release, it might be a matter of maybe 30 minutes of the right people sitting together and just confirming that on these situations, on these conditions, nothing has changed for the next release. But you still have to go through that phase, not to forget it, because maybe it could be that a second supplier and a second module enters or will be added to the system, and then you would have to do a second supplier assessment, for example, for this new supplier.
Could also be
or you would have to slightly adapt your validation plan in case there is new modules that require a different approach of the validation,
like a scope change for
the
yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the reporting phase is always to push to production and then to release for production use.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We are close to the end.
Yeah, we're close to the end. Maybe I have one question. If we implement the tool, is it possible to have special adaptations to the tool, or to the how it is set up right now? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, it's important to keep the core principles of what we explained of our approach. And what we did is just a simple or an initial implementation. So for people or for projects that do have nothing at all, for example, they could use this system out of the box, right? But on the other hand, if there is very individual requirements, of course it can be adapted. I mean, it's a matter of minutes to add new fields or to change the workflow, to add new persons and so on. That's very flexible. The important thing is you have a defined workflow for each user story, and you have your quality gates defined on your individual needs, but you pass these quality gates, and each user story, each requirement, and each backlog item passes these quality gates until they get in the final state of validation.
So we have described all the processes as we've implemented them, and we can adapt according to the needs.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, you could also use another tool. I mean, we just chosen Jira because we already had it in the company, and we knew it a little bit how to, but I mean, implementing a workflow and several properties and so on could very well be done also in some other tooling system or tool. Yeah? It's not mandatory to use Jira or Confluence, but we just had it, and it's simple.
Yeah, I see.
The important thing is the workflow, the core principles, the ideas, and the processes behind. Of course, in some kind of details, like for example now the reporting of the testing and the traceability, there might be differences between the tools that you use, and not everything might be as good as you would like it to have. But yeah.
Matthias, we need to come to an end. I think the session will close in 18 seconds. So please don't hesitate to contact us via the chat functions. We would be happy to have one-on-one discussions or via email.